That evening, the kingdom of Ambalu was about to change, but none of the people who lived there knew it. Least of all Sani, a young woman who had walked into the forests on her own. In Ambalu, women were not allowed to go into the forest without a man accompanying them because of how dangerous it could be. The forest connected to so many other kingdoms, and as a result, anyone at all could be found there, including bandits and barbarians. This made it a major risk for them. Also, there were lots of wild animals in the forest, which was another reason women weren't allowed. But Sani was desperate. Her mother was seriously ill, and she needed a herb that only grew in the forest. Her choice was either to go into the forest or wait for a couple of days so that the merchants would buy them from the neighboring kingdoms. Sani was scared that her mother didn't have that much time, so she went into the forest, armed with a small knife, ready to defend herself. She had timed it carefully while the sun was setting, which was the best time to get the herbs. That evening, she moved further into the forest, taking careful steps as she looked around warily, jumping at every little sound that she heard. Eventually, she found the herbs she was looking for. She plucked as much as she could carry, making sure that her bag was full. Then she got up to leave, happy that she had gotten it without any trouble. But as she stood up from the ground, she froze up as she realized that she wasn't alone. 3 men stepped out of hiding. They were badly dressed, and they looked filthy as they stared at her. They demanded that she give them her valuables, but she told them that she didn't have any, which was true because she was poor. Unfortunately, the men didn't like this response. They warned her that they would hurt her if she refused to comply with their demands. But Sani could only beg them to spare her. She showed them the herbs that she had come to pluck and about her sick mother. She swore that if they let her go, she wouldn't say a word about it to anyone. But none of the men were interested in that. As a matter of fact, she saw clearly that they only wanted to force themselves on her and have their way with her. No matter how hard she begged, they would try to do it anyway. But she wasn't ready to let that happen. Clutching her knife tightly in her hand, she suddenly turned and began to run. She was running in the direction of where she had come from, towards the entrance of the forest. The men chased after her, their long legs eating up the distance easily. As she ran, she could hear her heart beating heavily in her ears, but she could also hear the heavy footfalls of the men that were chasing her. Up above, the sun was slowly setting, and it was getting dark. Sani was panicking. If she didn't get out of the forest by nightfall, she would be doomed. So, she ran as fast as she could, and because the forest had only limited light, she could barely see where she was going. The ground ahead of her was shrouded in darkness, so she didn't see a tree trunk sticking out of the ground until it was just too late. She kicked it hard with her toe, losing her balance as she fell. She rolled on the ground and then slammed into a tree. Her entire body racked with pain, but she chose not to dwell on it. She had to focus more on getting out of the forest in one piece. But as she tried to get up, she saw that the men had caught up with her, flanking her and blocking her exits. They stared at her with eyes that showed that they had nothing but bad intentions for her. Then, one of the men stepped forward and tried to grab her by the front of her dress. A hand appeared from behind Sani and grabbed the man's wrist, squeezing it tightly. The man screamed in pain as his fist relaxed at once and he began to writhe. Sani stared at the newcomer. She didn't know him yet, but his name was Sendar. When he released the man's wrist, it was now blackened and looked like it had suffered from frostbite. Sendar stared at her, and almost immediately, she noticed the shift in the air. Everything was now considerably colder. The air was chill, almost as if a storm was about to start. The plants around them were wilting. Sani found herself rubbing her arms so that she could warm herself up. The 3 men who were attacking her also noticed the cold in the air, but none of them cared. They simply launched themselves at Sendar, who easily dodged their blows, and every time he hit them, their body temperature dropped significantly. Soon, they could no longer fight him. Their body got so cold that they fell to the ground. Sani remained transfixed by the tree as she watched Sendar defeat them. When he turned around to face her, she screamed in pure horror. She could tell that he was the cause of the sudden cold. When he reached for her, she gave a loud cry and ran off. She didn't look back. She couldn't even see where she was going because the forest was now dark. But she didn't stop running at all. The more distance she put between herself and Sendar, the warmer her body became. And by the time she burst out of the forest, her chest was heaving like it was about to burst, and she was sweating profusely. She went straight to the hut and handed the herbs over so that her mother could be treated. But from there, she hurried to the palace where Chief Dialo resided. The soldiers tried to stop her, but she was screaming at the top of her voice. She had found out the cause of all their suffering. The reason the kingdom of Ambalu was suffering a famine, and she told him it was Sendar. When Sendar allowed her to run away from the forest, he knew what he was doing. He also knew the repercussions. He knew that saving Sani would have meant him revealing the supernatural things that he could do. But he had no choice. He couldn't allow the girl to be attacked by those barbarians. But then, Sendar had not always been this kind of person. As a matter of fact, he used to be very selfish and self-centered. Before his life transformed totally, Sendar was a hunter. He was very famous because kingdoms all around Ambalu knew of him. He could go into the forest and hunt a lion with only a knife to protect himself. And he was also known to go into the mountains and caves, hunting down the more reclusive animals that loved to hide. He was very brave, and he believed that as long as he believed he could do it, then there was nothing to stop him. His skills made him so popular that hunter groups always wanted to go hunting with him because he always got the best kills. Even royalty from other kingdoms looked forward to when he would hunt with them. But then, his fame and skills got to his head. He started believing that he was untouchable and no animal could outwit him. He proclaimed himself the best hunter all over the world and dared anyone to challenge the claim. No one came forward to challenge him, but one of the hunters dared him to prove his claims. If he was really as good as he claimed to be, then he could go hunting without any protection at all. He was to go catch a wild animal without any weapon. Sendar could have said no, but he agreed. That fateful day, he walked into the forest with nothing but his fists and wit. He kept his pace slow as he listened hard around him. He forced himself to concentrate. He didn't dare be nervous because he had to think clearly. As he kept moving forward, he continued cautiously. Then, he heard a slight rustle and knew that a lion had spotted him. He stopped at once, standing very still. He couldn't see it yet, so he knew he had to get the lion into his sight. He slowly turned and heard a low growl. And sure enough, the animal was right there. It was big and mighty, staring at him as if it had not eaten for the past 5 years. Suddenly, Sendar turned around and ran off in the opposite direction. With a roar, the lion gave chase. Sendar knew the forest like the back of his hand, so he easily navigated his way through the trees. But the lion was built for such a terrain, and it was getting closer and closer to him. Sendar suddenly turned sharply, causing the lion to pitch forward past him. He then immediately climbed up a tree and perched on a branch. The animal looked at him and immediately changed course, climbing up the tree as well. The lion was heavy, but it managed to do it, which was exactly what Sendar had planned. As it climbed up after him, Sendar got to the edge of the tree, leapt off it, and landed deftly on another. He climbed through the branches as the lion was still making its way towards the edge of that tree. It wanted to jump as well, but Sendar set himself perfectly. Just as the lion leapt into the air, mouth wide open and claws brandished, Sendar jumped up as well with a scream. He slammed into the side of the lion. They crashed through the branches and then fell to the ground. Sendar landed hard on the lion, and it gave a sharp cry of pain. He rolled off at once to his feet. The lion roared once more and got up from the ground. It stared at Sendar, who began to step backward. He grabbed the broken branch, holding it over his head, ready to strike. The lion tried to jump at him, but the effort ended in a squeal of intense pain as it ended up limping instead. Sendar smiled to himself. The lion's leg was broken. As if realizing that it was now in mortal danger, the animal turned and limped off. Sendar chased after it. He also threw the branch away. If he managed to capture the lion alive with his bare hands, his reputation as the best hunter in the world would never be challenged. So he kept pursuing the animal, trying to capture it. But it was elusive. It led him deep into the bowels of the forest, and to the point where the forest connected to the mountains and the caves. In all his years as a hunter, he had never come this far before. He also knew that he would never have found the place without the help of the wounded animal. But as he continued following the lion, his bravado slowly began to fade as he realized that they were no longer alone. More animals were suddenly behind him. There were other lions, tigers, and even a cheetah. All of them had him surrounded, and he saw that the lion had led him right into its den. He was in big trouble. There was no way he could fight his way out, especially when he had no weapon. Sendar turned suddenly and tried to run, but everywhere he faced, animals were blocking his exit. They all wanted a piece of him. In panic, he ran in the only direction where there were no animals, the caves at the foot of the mountain. He ran as fast as he could, pumping speed into his legs, and the animals all gave chase. But before any of them could get to him, he entered the cave. None of them followed him in. He should have seen this as a sign, but at the moment he was just grateful to be alive. Inside the cave was very dark because even the moonlight couldn't get in. Sendar had never been in it before. He didn't even know that there was a cave at the bottom of the mountain deep inside the forest. He had no light to guide him, and he couldn't return to the forest either because the animals would tear him apart. So he kept going deeper into the cave. He then saw that the deeper he went, the colder he became. But then he soon found a light. He walked excitedly towards it, hoping that it led out of the cave. But he was wrong. It was a strange crystal that was in the deepest part of the cave. It seemed to be emitting its own light, but it also seemed to be the one giving off the cold in the air. Sendar decided to take one, hoping that he would use it to see his way out of the cave and through the forest. He picked up a big crystal and dropped it back at once. It was so cold, almost making his fingers numb. But he had no choice, so he picked it up again. But this time there was a reaction, not from him, but from his own body. He let out a scream as if he was kicked in the knee. He fell to the floor. The crystal in his hand became even colder, and the light got brighter. Suddenly, the cave began to tremble. The walls were moving. It was about to collapse. In pure panic, Sendar abandoned the crystal and staggered to his feet. His vision was dizzy, and he felt as if someone had kicked him in the head. He tried to run out, but he was finding it hard to keep his balance. Then the floor tipped to the side. He then fell hard, hitting his head. The floor of the cave became so smooth that he was sliding across it, screaming at the top of his lungs as he bounced off the walls, hitting his head multiple times. As he kept sliding, unable to stop himself, he noticed some more light ahead as well. This time it was daylight. He was sliding towards the exit, and he was moving so fast that he couldn't stop himself. Soon he slid out, and the cave spat him into the air. He was airborne for a few seconds before he landed into a flowing river. The tides of the river were so strong that they pulled him at once, dragging him towards the sea. There was no stopping it. Sendar tried to grab a rock, but his hands merely slid off it. Suddenly, the water stopped flowing. It was so sudden that his entire body jerked from the stop as if an invisible hand had pulled at him. And when he looked around, his eyes widened in horror as he realized what had happened. The river that was flowing just now had frozen up. It was now a long stretch of thick ice. He was stuck inside it as well, but he managed to pull himself out of it. But things only got worse, because when he stepped out, the plants on the riverbed began to wilt and die, and birds that were in the air fell to their deaths. Sendar was terrified. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew at once that he was responsible. When he touched the crystal, it had done something to him, and now he was no longer the same man. He tried to return to his home, but by then, panic was already setting in Ambalu. Everyone was complaining about the sudden cold. Wells had dried up, people were falling seriously ill. The frozen river also raised some problems. All the creatures inside it perished at once, a huge blow to the fishermen and traders of Ambalu who relied on it. The people were scared. They felt that they had done something to anger the gods and they were cursed. Sendar refused to go home. He had a sister there called Kesa who he didn't want to hurt. If he got too close to her, the cold would take her life. So he remained at the market square. He couldn't eat or drink anything. When he tried to eat, The cold killed it before it reached his mouth, and if he ate it anyway, it was tasteless. And when he tried to drink anything, it turned into blocks of ice. He was hungry and desperate. He didn't know what to do about his condition. All he knew was that things were getting worse, not just for him, but for the people of Ambalu. Cattle and livestock were dying almost every day. More and more people were falling ill. So, with no other choice, he decided to leave Ambalu behind and hope that, with his absence, things would get better. He returned to the forest, but he was never able to find the cave. For more than a week, he wandered the forest, hungry and thirsty. He forced himself to chew chunks of ice blocks because nothing else could work. He couldn't hunt because the cold chased all animals from him, no matter how wild they were. As he got hungrier, he got weaker, and one day he passed out on the forest floor. When he woke up, he found himself back in the cave, but he wasn't alone. There was an old man with him who introduced himself as Tamba. Tamba told him that he had been unconscious for more than 3 days, and his heart had almost stopped beating before Tamba found him in the woods. Sendar saw that his body was still emitting cold, but he wanted to know why Tamba wasn't feeling sick like everyone else. Turned out that Tamba was just like him. Many years ago, as a young boy, he too had stumbled into the cave and found the crystals. He touched them and his body became cold. He was forced to remain in the cave until he learned how to master the cold and control it. But by the time he was confident enough to leave without hurting anyone, he was too old and so many years had passed. So he simply remained in the cave. Tamba told him that he had gone hunting the night Sendar found the crystal and went in. If not, he would have stopped him. Sendar asked if there was a way they could reverse the effects, but sadly, there wasn't. This was how he was going to be for the rest of his life. And even worse, Tamba told him that he could never return to Ambalu because the people were looking for the cause of the sudden cold that had wiped out their plants and livestock. They knew that it wasn't natural, so if they learned of his new abilities, they would hunt him down. He had no choice but to remain in the cave, and meanwhile, Tamba would teach him how to control the cold. And that was how they set to work. Tamba taught him how to regulate the cold he was emitting. He had to control his emotions because the more emotional he got, the worse it would get. But when he was clear-headed, he found it easier to handle. That way, he was able to warm himself up and also eat and drink properly. Soon, Tamba took him out into the forest so he could walk around and get the sunlight. Tamba told him that he had melted the river once again so more fish would come, but the people of Ambalu were still hurting from the damage already done. As time passed, Sendar learned, and he was soon confident enough to go out into the forest on his own. He plucked fruits from the trees and hunted wild animals. During these trips, he found out that a lot of barbarians and bandits hung around in parts of the forest to rob and hurt people. One time, he saw them attacking a young hunter who had caught a leopard. They wanted to seize his animal from him and beat him up, but Sendar came to the rescue. He beat up the men and froze their hands so much that they would never be able to use them to beat anyone ever again. When he told Tamba about this, the old man was unhappy. He said that they needed to stay in secrecy for their own good. That was the best way. Because if people went around talking about him to the kingdoms, it would only be a matter of time before they found them. Sendar was adamant. He was certain that he was doing the right thing. So, that fateful night, when he saw Sani being attacked after plucking herbs for her sick mother, he knew that he couldn't just ignore her and do nothing. But seeing Sani in such a vulnerable state, she reminded him of his own sister, whom he had left behind in Ambalu. It made him angry and emotional, and as he took it out on the men, he lost control of his cold, which was what Sani witnessed. He realized then that he had messed up big time, and he also knew that Sani would report everything that happened to the chief. Sendar knew that his time in the cave was coming to an end. And just as he had suspected, Sani went right to the chief and reported him. She told him everything that had happened and how she was sure that Sendar was responsible for the loss of all the crops and livestock in the kingdom. Even though the river was flowing once again, it was no longer as populated as it used to be. At once, Chief Diallo dispatched soldiers to the forest to look for Sendar. Of course, none of them knew of the caves where he was hiding with Tama, so they never found him. But while also searching for him, They were forced to deal with the real dangers of the forest, like the barbarians who hung around there and also the wild animals. Many times, the soldiers were attacked by snakes, lions, and tigers. They were not as skilled as the hunters in neutralizing the animals, so many of them were wounded, but Sendar always interfered before things got too bad. He did it in a way that went unnoticed by the soldiers. He targeted his cold attacks at the animals, making them run away from them. Some of the soldiers who had strayed too far from the others ran into a group of bandits who were hiding. These guys were even worse than barbarians because they robbed and killed everyone that they came across. When they saw that they outnumbered the soldiers, they decided to kidnap and hold them for ransom. At once, they surrounded the soldiers and attacked. They fought for their lives, but it was futile because they were easily overpowered. Just as they were about to be taken away by the bandits, Sendar leapt from a tree and landed in their midst. He slapped one of the bandits so hard across the cheek that he flew through the air and crashed into a tree. He didn't get up again. Another one raised his sword and brought it down towards Sendar's head, but the former hunter caught it easily in his fist. He then made it grow cold, so cold that ice started forming along the blade. It became brittle, and with one punch, the sword broke into two. He then punched the man as well, sending him flying a few feet away before he crashed into a tree stump. The other bandits were surprised by this. Nobody had ever beaten them before, but they still tried once more. They attacked with more aggression, coming at him at the same time. But Sendar simply controlled the air around them, making it cold for them. He then turned it into a storm that blew them away. All of them slammed hard into trees, and at once, ice appeared around them and the trees, locking them in. Sendar looked at the soldier. They stared back at him in terror. They could see now that he was the one they were looking for, the one that they were meant to arrest. But they were too scared to do anything. Sendar calmly told them to return to Ambalu and tell Chief Dialo to stop searching for him, that he was not coming back there, and as long as he was alive, the people of Ambalu would never again suffer from what he did. He regretted freezing the river and causing all those livestock and crops to die. He also regretted making all those people sick. He swore that he would stay away so that they could all enjoy life again. Unfortunately, the soldiers interpreted his words as the confessions of a guilty man, and even worse, unlike Sani, they recognized him as the famous hunter in Ambalu who went into the forest and never returned. They ran off as he ordered them to, and when they rejoined their colleagues, they told them everything that had happened. However, they didn't mention the part that Sendar regretted what he did or that he would never return to Ambalu. They simply said that Sendar had told them that he was responsible for everything that happened. The soldiers returned to Ambalu and reported everything to Chief Dialo, the same way those soldiers had told them. The chief was hurt because when he found out that it was Sendar, an indigene of Ambalu, he found it hard to believe that someone would do such a thing to his own people. Soon, word spread around Ambalu at once, and everyone was told to be on the lookout for Sendar. They called him the bringer of death and famine. People were also warned to stay away from the forest because that was where he lived. Sendar's sister, Kesa, heard all these terrible things about her brother and refused to believe it. For months, when he had failed to return home, she had thought that he died in the forest because of the dare, but hearing every horrible thing said about him gave Ambalu sleepless nights. She realized that she would never be comfortable if she didn't talk to him. She knew her brother would never hurt her, so she decided to go look for him. What she didn't know, though, was that Chief Dialo had anticipated that as well and placed soldiers to watch her. The moment she left the hut to go towards the forest, they followed her. They hoped that she would lead them right to Sendar's hideout. Of course, Kesa didn't know where her brother was, but she was certain she would find him. She left Ambalu early in the morning when the sun was still high up in the sky. She walked hurriedly, and soon the kingdom was behind her. She had no direction or goal. She believed that fate would lead her to her big brother. But as she kept walking, she suddenly heard a loud hiss to her side. It was a large python curled up in the undergrowth. It was staring at her, poised to strike. The moment she saw it, she screamed in fear. The snake pulled its wide neck back, ready to strike. She jumped out of the way and ran at once, but it gave chase, sliding through the trees, hissing with menace as it went after her. As she ran for her life, she kept looking back to check if it was still following her. Worse, it was closing in on her. In her panic, she didn't see the tree stump sticking out of the ground. She kicked it hard and went flying face first into the ground. Her entire body hurt her as she immediately turned around. The snake was now too close. There was no way she could escape it. It pulled its fat neck back once more, fangs bared as it hissed at her, its forked tongue sticking into the air. Then it lunged at her, going towards her thigh. As she screamed in pain, already believing that it was over for her, a hand reached from the side and caught the snake by the neck, holding it tight its fist. Kesa turned, and to her shock and happiness, it was her brother. He froze the snake up and then threw it hard against a tree, causing it to break into two like chunks of blocks. Kesa climbed to her feet and hugged her brother. She was so happy to see him. They sat down on the tree stump and talked. She wanted to see where he was staying, but he told her that he couldn't take her there. He didn't want her to be plagued with the cold the same way that he was. He told her everything that happened and how it wasn't his fault. It also meant that he would never return to Ambalu again, because he didn't want a repeat of such a tragedy. She herself told him about everything happening back home. As they spoke, soldiers surrounded them with spears and arrows, and they were led by Chief Dialo himself. Kesa screamed in shock, realizing then that she had been followed. The chief warned Sendar to come quietly, or they would hurt both him and his sister. But he told them that he couldn't go anywhere with them for their safety and for Ambalu as a whole. Their weapons were powerless against him, and the soldiers there that Sendar had rescued from the bandits testified to that fact. Chief Dialo was adamant, though. He wanted to parade Sendar before the people of Ambalu as the criminal who destroyed their livelihood. He wanted him punished severely for it. But Sendar refused to go quietly with them. Dialo went on to threaten Kesa. He promised to arrest her unless he came quietly. But Sendar warned him sternly that if anything happened to his sister, the chief himself would suffer for it in great measure. Sendar told him that as long as his sister remained safe, he would have no reason to leave the forest and life would go on. Eventually, the chief had no choice but to leave him alone because, regardless of his anger, he still had to consider what was best for his people. But he swore that if Sendar took even a step outside the forest, or if he even hurt anyone who came into the forest, then Dialo would burn down the forest if it meant bringing him to justice. Sendar agreed to these terms. So, Dialo, Kesa, and the soldiers returned to Ambalu, but life never remained the same for them all. Hunters were scared of going into the forest because of him. Kesa was bullied and mocked everywhere she went, and they called her names simply because she was related to Sendar. At one time, she returned to the forest because she wanted to live with him, but he refused vehemently. So, she was forced to remain in the kingdom that had become increasingly toxic for her. Meanwhile, back at the cave, Sendar lived with Tamba, and he continued learning how to use his cold. But little did he know that trouble was brewing in Ambalu. Word had spread about the cold that hit the kingdom and crippled their economy. King Achu from the neighboring kingdom of Vurenta saw this as an opportunity to invade them. Vurenta shared a natural border with Ambalu, which was the forest, and King Achu had always wanted to claim Ambalu, not just because of the trees and animals there, but also because of their access to the river, which made it very good for rearing livestock. Word got to him about Sendar, and he figured that Chief Dialo would be too busy dealing with Sendar to properly protect the people. And when he attacked, he came with everything that he had. He sent soldiers around the forest for a full-on attack and then some more through the forest for a sneak attack. It was the soldiers in the forest that alerted Sendar and Tamba to King Achu's evil plans. At once, they sprang into action. The soldiers were armed with swords, spears, and arrows as they tried to take down Sendar, but he caused a hailstorm to fall on them. Fat chunks of ice fell like rain, battering them, and they became so cold they could no longer defend themselves. He then went after them, beating them profusely. He and Tamba dealt with them until not one of them could stand up ever again. From there, both of them ran as fast as they could out of the forest into Ambalu. But they were already late. The other group of soldiers had started their attack, huts were being burned, and people were being taken as prisoners. Soldiers of Ambalu were quickly overwhelmed. King Achu was leading his men to the palace so he could take out Chief Diallo himself, but Sendar and Tamba interfered. First, they fought off Achu's men, surrounding them with cold winds that ate through their armor. The men got so cold that they could barely fight. Their muscles became heavy and could barely hold up their weapons. Then, Sendar formed ice blocks around their feet, fixing them to the ground so they could not run off. Achu was about to attack Diallo when Sendar came from behind and pushed him out of the way. They then began to fight each other. Achu was a great fighter, and he moved quickly, but he was still no match for Sendar's cold. He grabbed the king's sword and then froze it up, causing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Achu tried to punch him, but he caught the fist in his hand. Another punch came towards his cheek, but he dodged that one and caught it. Then he began to freeze Achu's hands. He made it so cold that soon, the hand began to darken as it died off. He had given the evil king an extreme case of frostbite. With a final punch, he knocked Achu unconscious. With the king defeated, Diallo and the soldiers of Ambalu were motivated to fight, and they managed to round up every single soldier that had invaded their land. From there, Diallo led some more soldiers to Virenta and conquered it as well, making it a part of Ambalu. This heroic act changed people's perception of Sendar at once. They realized that he wasn't a bad person, and he had only made a mistake that had terrible consequences. It was then that the soldiers he rescued in the forest confessed that he saved them from bandits, and Sani also talked about how he saved her from barbarians who had tried to force themselves on her. The people were now seeing him for who he truly was, and they became more receptive of him. Hunters were now encouraged to go into the forests to hunt, because they were sure that they would be safe. Sendar and Tamba were happy about this because the people now loved them and they no longer had to live in isolation. They remained in the caves, though, so that no one would ever stumble into them and touch the crystals again. But they were no longer restricted from leaving the forest because they could both control their cold perfectly. Kesa was happy about this. The people now loved her, and many people begged her to introduce them to her brother. Even better, she and her brother could now see each other without any fear. Life was exactly as it should have been. In the forest, Sendar did his best to stay out of sight. He protected the people of Ambalu, especially in the forests where there were barbarians and bandits. The forest was now as safe as walking on an open road. This made people happy, and when they walked through it, they were always on the lookout for the coldest man who ever lived. His legend was born, and his name was Sendar. Today, the world knows Iceman as one of the most powerful beings ever imagined. A man who can freeze anything he touches, turn the air itself to ice, and command the cold like it is a part of his own body. A hero whose power could bury an entire kingdom in frost, or shield it from every enemy that dares to come. The world calls it fiction, but long before that story was ever drawn on a page, Africa already knew the truth of it. The idea of a man whose very touch turns water to ice, who can freeze a blade in his fist, raise a storm of hail with a thought, and stop a flowing river cold, is older than any comic book. It lived in the oldest legends of the continent, in the tales of those who wandered into places no one should go, touched something no one should touch, and came back carrying a power that changed them forever. Sendar was one of those legends, a proud hunter who thought he was untouchable, until his own arrogance led him deep into a cave where a strange crystal poured its cold into his blood and made him into something the world had never seen. He froze a river without meaning to. He killed the crops and the livestock of his own kingdom without lifting a hand in anger. And for that, his people called him the bringer of death and hunted him like a monster. He could have let them suffer for how they treated him. Instead, he protected them from the shadows. Because Sendar learned the hardest lesson a powerful person can learn, that the measure of a man is not the damage he can do, but what he chooses to do with the power once he understands it. He learned to master the cold instead of letting it master him. He froze the bandits who preyed on travelers. He drove the wild beasts back from the lost. And when an invading king came to burn his kingdom to the ground, the man they had called a curse became the only thing standing between his people and destruction. He wore no blue uniform. He belonged to no team of heroes in a faraway city. He was an African hunter with winter in his veins. A man feared for a mistake, hunted for a curse, and who guarded the very people who wanted him gone. The Man of Ice was never simply the invention of a comic book studio. The blueprint was drawn in the caves and forests of ancient Africa, in the legends of those who carried the cold and learned, through suffering, to wield it for good. Sendar's story was almost lost to time, frozen out of history and forgotten. But some legends refused to stay buried. This was his. And now you know where the legend of the coldest man who ever lived truly began.